I never imagined my life would end up in a courtroom fighting my dead son's wife for the custody of my grandson. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear Melissa's voice echoing across the silent courtroom that day, calm, confident, and cold. My son wants to live with me. Your Honor, she said. 8 months. That's how long it had been since we buried my son David. 8 months of trying to piece together what was left of our family. And here I was, gripping the edge of the bench until my knuckles turned white, fighting for the only piece of David still left in this world, his 12-year-old boy, Ethan. He sat beside his mother, dressed too formally for a child his age in a stiff navy blazer. Melissa had insisted he look presentable. The same woman who couldn't be bothered to wash his clothes, who forgot his school lunches, who never once noticed when he wore the same t-shirt for 3 days straight. Judge Carlton adjusted his glasses, his voice calm, but cutting through the air. Ethan, do you want to live with your mother? The courtroom went silent. My lawyer Patricia gave my hand a quick squeeze. We both knew how this usually went. Courts favored biological parents. No matter how many nights Ethan spent with me, no matter how many times Melissa canceled visits or left him alone, she was still his mother. Ethan stood up slowly. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. Your Honor, he began. Can I show you something first? From his pocket, he pulled out his phone, the one I'd bought him for his birthday, because Melissa forgot their phone upgrade appointment. He unlocked it and pressed play. Melissa's voice filled the courtroom, no longer sweet and composed, but sharp and impatient. Stop packing that bag, Ethan. You're not going to your grandmother's tonight. But Mom, you said I said plans changed. Brandon thinks it looks bad if you're always over there. Once this custody thing's settled, you won't be spending so much time with her anyway. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I saw Melissa's face pale. She tried to object, but the judge raised his hand. Continue. Ethan's voice came again through the tiny speaker. But Grandma, no buts. You're just like your father, always making things difficult. Once we move to Phoenix, you'll have a pool. You'll forget all about her. Then came the sound of a slamming door and quiet sobbing. My heart broke all over again. When the recording ended, the judge stared at Melissa for what felt like forever. Ms. Reynolds, would you like to explain this? She blinked rapidly, switching to tears on command. Your Honor, I've been under tremendous stress since losing David. Sometimes I say things I don't mean. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. But Ethan wasn't done. There's another part, sir, he said quietly. He scrolled and pressed play again. Melissa's voice filled the room once more this time, colder, speaking to her boyfriend Brandon. The lawyer says once I have full custody, we'll have more flexibility with Ethan's trust fund. That old witch won't be able to block anything. Brandon laughed. In the house, it's already mine. But the insurance went into Ethan's trust. Once I have custody, we'll petition to be the sole trustees. Lauren won't have a say. The air in the courtroom turned heavy. The judge's jaw tightened. When the audio stopped, no one spoke, not even Melissa. After a long silence, the judge said, We'll recess for 30 minutes. Outside the courtroom, Ethan slipped his small hand into mine. He hadn't done that in years. I'm sorry, Grandma, he whispered. I didn't want to embarrass her. You did nothing wrong, I told him. You just told the truth. When court resumed, the judge's voice was firm. Temporary full custody is granted to the maternal grandmother, Lauren Carter. The court finds sufficient evidence of potential financial exploitation. Melissa didn't even look at Ethan. She just glared at me. This isn't over, she hissed. As we left the courthouse, I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt a hollow ache. My grandson had been forced to expose his mother's deceit to protect himself. At home, Ethan dropped his backpack and asked, Can I put my stuff in the blue room? Of course, I said softly. That evening, Emma, my daughter, a surgeon in Seattle, called. Mom, what happened? The judge gave me custody, I said. Emma exhaled in relief. Good, but Melissa won't stop. You know that, right? I did know, and I was right. The next morning, Melissa filed an emergency motion to overturn the order, claiming the recording was illegal and that I'd coerced Ethan into it. My lawyer texted me, Don't worry, we're ready. But my stomach turned anyway. Later that day, Ethan came downstairs holding my phone. Mom's calling. Should I answer? The court had allowed supervised calls, so I nodded. He pressed the green button. Hi, Mom, he said. Even across the room, I could hear her anger. Ethan listened quietly, then said, "No, Grandma didn't tell me to record. I did it because it was the truth." He paused, then added softly, "I don't want to move to Phoenix. I want to stay here, with Grandma." Whatever Melissa said next made him flinch. He handed me the phone and walked away. "Melissa, I said this hostility. You turned my son against me," she snapped. "Congratulations. Enjoy playing mommy until the court corrects this." I swallowed hard. "If you're unhappy with how you appear in that recording, maybe reflect on your behavior." "This is temporary," she spat. "You're 67. No judge will hand a child to someone your age." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see it. "Ethan needs stability," I said, "not manipulation." "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she whispered before hanging up. The silence that followed was deafening. That night, after I tucked Ethan in, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the photo of David, his easy smile, his kind eyes. "I'm trying," I whispered to the frame. "I'm doing everything I can." The next morning, Emma arrived dragging her suitcase through the door before I could even put coffee on. "I took a 2-week leave," she said briskly. "We'll handle this together." Her energy filled the house like sunlight. Within an hour, she had already contacted psychologists, printed Ethan's medical records, and arranged consultations. But just as I started to feel hopeful, my lawyer called again. "Lauren," Patricia said grimly, "Melissa just accused you of elder exploitation." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "What? She's claiming you're manipulating Ethan to access his trust fund." I laughed bitterly. "She's projecting. She's also asking the court to assign a guardian and supervised visitation for you," Patricia continued. When I hung up, I could barely breathe. Emma squeezed my hand. "This is classic Darvo," she said. "Deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender." She's flipping the story. "I've done nothing wrong," I whispered. "I've bent over backward not to speak ill of her." Emma nodded. "We'll prove it." But even as she said it, I could feel the walls closing in. Ethan came home from school later that day smiling, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "We made model rockets in science today," he said. I hugged him, holding him just a little longer than usual, because deep down I knew the war was only beginning. The following morning began quietly, too quietly. The sunlight filtering through the curtains felt deceptive, as if the world outside dared to be peaceful while my own was on the verge of collapse. I'd barely sipped my coffee when Emma walked in, already dressed for battle, hair tied back, laptop under one arm, her expression set with the calm fury that meant she'd made a plan. "Mom," she said, sitting across from me, "I called the hospital legal department. They're drafting a statement verifying every expense made from Ethan's trust. That audit Melissa demanded, it's going to destroy her case, not ours." I managed a faint smile. "You always were your father's daughter, thorough to the point of intimidation." Emma gave a soft laugh, then her tone softened. "But Mom, we also need to prepare Ethan. The court's going to send a guardian ad litem. They'll interview him. We have to make sure he doesn't feel pressured or scared." Before I could respond, the sound of a familiar ringtone cut through the air. My phone lying on the counter buzzed with Melissa's name. I hesitated before answering. "Lauren," she began, her tone icy. "I heard from my lawyer. You've apparently turned my neighbors against me now." "What are you talking about?" "I've been informed that multiple statements were filed by people on your street. Lies. All of them." I took a slow breath. "They weren't lies, Melissa. They were observations, truths, actually. People saw you neglect Ethan. They heard your fights. They saw him come to my house hungry." Her voice broke for the briefest moment before hardening again. "You think you're winning, but this isn't over." "Maybe it should be," I said quietly. "Maybe it's time to stop fighting and think about Ethan for once." There was silence on the other end, then a single cold reply. "You'll regret this." When the call ended, I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the dark glass. I looked older than I remembered. Tired, hollow-eyed, a woman carrying too many ghosts. That evening, Emma picked Ethan up from school. He came home holding a cone of mint chocolate chip ice cream and a shy smile. "Aunt Emma says I'm brave," he announced proudly. "You are," I said, meaning it. Then his expression grew serious. "Grandma Mom's been posting about you online." My stomach sank. "What kind of posts?" He hesitated. "She says you're trying to steal me because you want Dad's money." Emma's jaw tightened. "So she's gone public." I checked my phone later that night, and sure enough, there it was. Melissa's carefully staged photos, tearful captions, and hashtags about elder abuse and alienation. Thousands of strangers were commenting, calling me a monster, a thief. I wanted to scream. But Patricia's warning echoed in my mind. Do not engage publicly, document, don't respond. So I screenshotted every post, every lie, every fake smile in those old photos she weaponized. Still, it hurt. Not for me, but for Ethan. For the boy who had to grow up watching adults turn love into a battlefield. 3 days later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. For one disoriented second, I thought I was dreaming. But then came the cold rush of reality, the alarm blaring, the faint smell of dust. I grabbed my phone and crept down the stairs, heart pounding. A brick lay on the living room floor amid glittering shards of broken window glass. Taped to it was a note scrawled in messy block letters, "Drop the case or worse next time." I called the police with trembling hands. They came quickly, but their politeness couldn't hide the skepticism in their eyes. "We'll file a report," the officer said, jotting something down. "Do you have any security footage?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but I will by tomorrow." As soon as they left, Emma was already on her laptop ordering a full security system: cameras, alarms, motion sensors. "This ends now," she muttered. When Ethan woke and saw the police cars, his eyes widened. "Did something bad happen, Grandma?" I forced a smile. "Just an accident with the window, sweetheart." He nodded slowly, but didn't look convinced. That night, I found him asleep on the couch downstairs, curled under a blanket near my chair. He hadn't said he was scared, but I knew. 2 days later, the next attack came, not with a brick, but with bureaucracy. A woman from Child Protective Services showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, smile, practiced and professional. "We received a report of medical neglect," she said. I almost laughed. "You're joking." "I'm afraid not," she said gently. "It's standard procedure to investigate." I let her in. She inspected the fridge, Ethan's room, even our medicine cabinet. When she was done, she closed her folder and gave a small, sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Carter, I want you to know this happens often in custody disputes. Nothing I've seen raises concern. But the damage was done." Ethan heard. He asked questions. He wanted to know why someone thought I'd hurt him. That night, he couldn't sleep. I heard him tiptoeing to my room, clutching his pillow. "Can I stay here tonight?" "Of course," I whispered, lifting the blanket. He curled against me the way he used to when he was little, and I stared at the ceiling, wondering how much more a 12-year-old could take. The next morning, Emma called Dr. Shaw, a child psychologist recommended by the court. Ethan met with her twice a week, and for the first time in months, he seemed to have a place to lay down the weight of it all. After the third session, Dr. Shaw pulled me aside. "Ethan is bright and strong," she said softly, "but he's taking on the role of protector. He believes it's his job to defend you. That's too much for a child." I nodded, guilt washing over me. "I've tried to shield him." "You can't shield him from grief," she said gently. "But you can remind him he's not responsible for yours." Her words lingered in my mind long after I got home. That evening, as I watched Ethan quietly doing his homework, the sound of his pencil scratching steady and sure, I realized she was right. My fight with Melissa had made him feel like he was the adult in this house. I couldn't let that continue. But as much as I wanted peace, I also knew something dark was building. Melissa wasn't done. The lies, the threats, the manipulation, it was all escalating. I sat at the kitchen table late into the night, the glow from the security cameras flickering on my phone screen. Somewhere beyond those images, I imagined Melissa watching, waiting, calculating her next move. I whispered into the quiet, "You'll never win. Not this time." Because this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a war for my grandson's soul, and I would burn every last bridge if it meant saving him from her. By the time dawn broke, I hadn't slept a single hour. The storm that rattled the windows through the night finally gave way to a pale, exhausted sunrise, the kind that made the world look colorless and washed out. But inside me, the tension was still alive, pulsing like electricity under my skin. Emma came downstairs just after 6, her hair pulled into a loose knot, laptop already open. She didn't need to ask if I'd slept. "You look like you spent the night in a courtroom," she said softly, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. "In a way, I did," I murmured. I kept thinking about that note on the brick, about how easily this could get worse. Emma's gaze darkened. It's already worse than it should ever have been. Mom, Melissa isn't acting out of grief anymore. This is about power and money. People like her don't stop until they get what they think they're owed. I knew she was right. I also knew that confronting Melissa directly would only feed her obsession with control. But Emma had always inherited her father's decisive nature. She didn't believe in waiting for storms to pass. She believed in building roofs. By mid-morning, she'd already spoken with our lawyer Patricia, who recommended filing for a restraining order based on the vandalism and the CPS report pattern. The judge will see a clear escalation, Patricia said over the phone. Keep documenting everything. It all builds credibility. I hung up and tried to steady my breath. Credibility, evidence, legal strategy. It all sounded clinical and safe, but the truth was, this wasn't a legal exercise, it was my life, and Ethan's. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin before realizing it was just Diane, my neighbor. She stood on the porch, clutching a Tupperware dish and a manila envelope. I brought dinner, she said, holding up the dish and statements. Statements. From the neighborhood, she said firmly. 5 of us wrote down everything we've seen over the past year. The nights Ethan came here crying, the mornings he showed up before school because no one made him breakfast, the weekends Melissa disappeared. You can give them to your lawyer. I stared at her speechless. Diane, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, she interrupted. You've been fighting this alone for too long. It's time people see what's really happening. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and I realized she wasn't just helping me out of loyalty. She was angry at the injustice, at Melissa's audacity, at the fact that a child had been caught in the middle of all this. When she left, I carried the envelope to the kitchen table where Ethan was working on a model rocket. He looked up and smiled faintly. Dr. Shaw says focusing on projects helps me stay calm. She's a smart woman, I said softly. Grandma? He asked suddenly, his eyes flicking up from the model. Why does Mom hate you so much? The question struck me like a blade. She doesn't hate me, I lied automatically. She's just lost. People do strange things when they're hurt. But she's not the one who got hurt, Ethan said simply. You lost Dad, not her. I didn't know what to say. There was too much truth in his words, too much wisdom for someone so young. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. You shouldn't have to understand grown-up pain, I whispered. He shrugged. I'm trying to, though, so I can fix it. Sweetheart, I said gently, this isn't something you can fix. His face set in quiet determination. Dad said we have to stand up for what's right, even if it's hard. And just like that, I saw David in him, his stubbornness, his quiet strength, the same calm fire that used to live in my son's eyes when he believed in something. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Emma sat across from me at the kitchen table. The clock ticked steadily between us. Mom, she said, I think it's time to change strategy. What do you mean? She's unpredictable. She's escalating, and the system is slow. What if we don't wait for the court to protect us? What if we take away her reason to keep fighting? I frowned. Her reason? Money, Emma said simply. It's always been about Ethan's trust. That's what she wants. Her words hung heavy in the air. You're suggesting we buy her off. I'm suggesting we negotiate peace, Emma replied. You know what Dad used to say, sometimes you amputate a limb to save the body. If giving her something now ends this war, maybe that's what we have to do. I stared at my daughter, torn between outrage and understanding. The thought of paying Melissa felt obscene. It meant letting her win, at least in her own twisted way. But then I thought of Ethan, his tired eyes, his sleepless nights, his innocence slowly eroding under the weight of adult greed. What if she refuses? I asked finally. She won't, Emma said. Not if we offer enough, and if she accepts, we make it airtight, legal witnessed, and final. She signs away custody, visitation, everything, for good. I closed my eyes. Your father would hate this. Maybe, she admitted. But he'd hate watching his grandson suffer even more. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by Ethan's bed again, watching his chest rise and fall, the soft rhythm of his breathing, almost enough to calm the storm inside me. And as I sat there, I realized Emma was right. Peace didn't always come from justice. Sometimes peace came with a price tag. When I met with Patricia the next morning, I told her what we'd decided. You want to offer Melissa money to walk away? She asked, staring at me in disbelief. Yes, I said firmly. Personal funds, not from the trust. This isn't about buying Ethan. It's about ending this nightmare. Patricia leaned back, studying me for a long moment. It's risky, she said finally, but given her motivations, it might actually work. That night, Emma reached out to someone unexpected, Brandon's ex-wife, a nurse at her hospital. Word was that she despised him and still held a grudge over unpaid alimony. Emma explained the situation carefully, and the woman agreed to act as a go-between, quietly floating the idea to Melissa through mutual acquaintances. 3 days later, I was trimming roses in the garden when my phone rang. Melissa's voice was calm, almost polite. Lauren, she said, I think it's time we discussed a permanent solution to this situation. My heart hammered, but I kept my tone steady. I'm listening. I've been thinking, she continued smoothly. Ethan's comfortable with you. I'm considering relocating to Phoenix with Brandon. Maybe it's best for everyone if things stay that way. She paused, letting the implication sink in. Of course, there would have to be some acknowledgement of my sacrifice. My throat went dry. What kind of acknowledgement? A financial one, she said briskly. $250,000 in exchange for me voluntarily terminating my parental rights. It took everything in me not to gasp. When I hung up, Emma was waiting in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Did she bite? I nodded. She bit hard. We both knew what this meant. The war was about to end, just not in any way I'd ever imagined. 2 days later, I sat in Patricia's office across a polished oak desk that had seen more heartbreak than wood grain. The morning light spilled through the blinds, striping her legal pads and files in gold and shadow. Emma sat beside me, perfectly composed but visibly tense, her thumb pressed hard against the edge of her notebook, a quiet outlet for her anger. Patricia leaned forward, clasping her hands. Let me get this straight, she said. Melissa offered to terminate her parental rights voluntarily in exchange for $250,000. Yes, I said quietly. And she framed it like it was her idea, her noble act of selflessness. She even used the word sacrifice. Patricia sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. That figure alone tells me she's serious. It's a clean, calculated number. Not outrageously high, but enough to look reasonable to a court, which means she's already spoken to her attorney. Emma leaned forward. Can it work? It can, Patricia said slowly. But it has to look like her choice, not yours. The court must believe this was her decision for Ethan's best interest, not a transaction. She tapped her pen against her notebook, thinking. We'll need an airtight agreement. Escrow, relocation, verification, non-disclosure clause, and judicial oversight. If we pull this off properly, it won't just end the fight, it will protect Ethan for good. The word protect sank into me like medicine. Do it, I said, whatever it takes. Patricia nodded. I'll draft the framework. But remember, Lauren, this kind of negotiation walks a fine moral line. You're not buying her silence, you're buying your grandson's peace. Never forget that. The Starbucks on Main Street was chosen for its neutral energy, public, enough to discourage conflict, quiet enough for private conversation. Patricia had suggested it herself. There's a certain civility to public negotiations, she'd said. It keeps people on their best behavior. Melissa arrived on time, of course. She always performed punctuality like it was a virtue. Her hair was sleek, her outfit conservative gray, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses she removed with deliberate grace. Behind her trailed her attorney, Gregory Walsh, all polished charm and predator's smile. She didn't glance at me when she sat down. Lauren, Emma. I gave a polite nod. Patricia began before Melissa could take the lead. We've reviewed your proposal, she said crisply. My clients are prepared to agree to the amount and terms with certain conditions. Walsh's brow arched slightly. Conditions. Patricia slid the papers across the table. The funds will be placed in escrow, 15% released upon signing, the remainder upon court approval and verification of your client's relocation to Phoenix. There's also a non-disclosure clause, no public statements, no social media, no discussions with Ethan about the financial aspects of this agreement. Melissa scanned the document, her expression smooth, but her jaw tightening. 60 days for relocation, she said sharply. That's excessive. It's the standard timeline, Patricia replied evenly. Unless you'd prefer to delay payment until the move is complete. Walsh smiled faintly, leaning toward Melissa. We'll review it, he murmured. Emma spoke, then her tone calm but edged. The relocation clause isn't negotiable. It's part of the court's justification for termination. Without it, the judge will deny the petition. Melissa's eyes flickered. For a moment, I saw something behind the performance nerves, maybe, or fear. But then she smoothed her face and gave that little corporate smile she used when pretending control. Of course. I understand. The negotiation dragged for nearly 2 hours. Percentages shifted, phrasing was dissected, every sentence scrutinized for advantage. Through it all, Melissa's gaze darted occasionally toward the window where Brandon waited in the parking lot, leaning against his car with his phone in hand. He never came in. He didn't need to. His shadow hung over every word. When it was finally over, Melissa asked, "When can I come pack Ethan's things?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, her voice had softened, not with affection, but with something like fatigue. "When he's at school," I said quietly. "You can have the house to yourself. I'll let you know when." She nodded once. "There are a few things from David I want him to keep." The mention of my son hit me like a sudden gust of cold air. I'd almost forgotten she'd once been part of him, his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he'd loved enough to trust with his legacy. Somewhere inside her, that version of Melissa had to still exist. I wondered if she remembered it too. "Thank you," she said softly. For the briefest instant, her mask cracked, something vulnerable flickering through her eyes before she stood and slipped her sunglasses back on. "You'll hear from my attorney." Back home, I stood in Ethan's doorway watching him assemble a small telescope he'd gotten for his birthday. "I want to see the rings of Saturn tonight," he said with quiet determination. I smiled and brushed his hair back. "You've got your father's curiosity." He grinned. "Aunt Emma says that's a compliment." It was. And it broke my heart. Because soon Melissa would vanish from his life like a shadow at sunrise, and I wasn't sure what that would do to him. When Emma came downstairs later that night, she found me sitting in the dark living room, the flicker of the security monitor illuminating my face. "She's going to do it," I said flatly. "I know," Emma replied, sitting beside me. "She's already too far in with Brandon. She sees this as a transaction, not a loss." I stared at the footage looping on the screen, the driveway, the porch, the trees swaying in the night. "How do you make peace with something like this?" "You don't," Emma said softly. "You just learn to live with the price you paid for it." 3 weeks later, the agreement was signed. Melissa received her first payment. The court date was set. The night before she came to pack Ethan's things, he asked if he could call her. "Just once," he said. "I want to tell her something." Emma hesitated, but I nodded. "Okay. Tomorrow morning before she comes." He hugged me tightly before bed, his arms fierce around my neck. "Love you, Grandma," he whispered. "Love you too, sweetheart." The next day was heavy with silence. Rain drummed on the roof as Melissa arrived to pack her car trunk, open boxes labeled neatly, books, clothes, toys. I stayed in the kitchen, unable to watch. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang. Her voice was steady, almost fragile. "He asked me why the money mattered more than he did," she said quietly. My throat closed. "What did you tell him?" I whispered. "The truth," she said after a long pause. "That I'm not cut out to be a mother. That I tried because David wanted me to. But he deserves better than what I can give." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The rain filled the silence between us. "He said he forgives me," she continued. "Can you believe that? After everything he forgave me." I could hear her tears, now real, not performed. "Take care of him, Lauren." And then the line went dead. When Ethan returned that evening, his eyes were red but clear. "I told Mom it's okay for her to go," he said quietly, "that she doesn't have to pretend anymore." I gathered him into my arms. He didn't cry. Neither did I. There was nothing left to cry about. 3 weeks later, Judge Carlton signed the final order. Melissa's parental rights were officially terminated. In the courtroom, Ethan stood tall beside me in the same navy blazer from that first hearing, now slightly small on him. My dad used to say family is about showing up. He told the judge when asked how he felt. "My grandma and Aunt Emma show up for me every day." The judge's gavel came down with quiet finality. Melissa didn't look at me when she left, but as she passed Ethan, she paused just long enough to whisper, "Be good, okay?" And then she was gone. That night, Ethan and I stood in the backyard under the telescope. The air was cool, the stars sharp and clear. "There," he said, pointing. "I can see Saturn's rings." I smiled, my arm around his shoulders. "Your dad would have loved this." He nodded. "I think he's watching." And for the first time in months, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, peace was possible. If you've ever loved someone enough to fight for them, even when it cost you everything, then you understand me. If you've ever chosen peace over pride, forgiveness over vengeance, you know this story isn't just mine. Please, if my story touched your heart, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs strength, and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, what would you do to protect someone you love?